Hello, everybody. James here, WSI. And once again, it is a returning champion, the former AWA World Heavyweight Champion, living legend, and the master of the stall. It is, of course, Larry Zbyszko. Morning, afternoon.
Well, thank you. It's an early afternoon here. It's a little afternoon, 12:10.
You disappointed me, Larry. We were just talking off air, and you don't play as much golf as you used to. Was the WCW, when in WCW, how many of the annual golf championships internal did you do at the time?
Well, you know what? I mean, I golfed a lot because during the days of the WCW broadcasting, forgot for 10 years it was a gravy job. I only worked like a day and a half a week. I flew out for Nitro, and so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I golfed 2, 3 times a week or so every week and loved it. And I was a scratch golfer. And then, I tried when I was 50 and WCW ended. I moved to Florida to play on the professional mini tours all over Florida. And I did good, but I was 3 strokes not good enough to win any kind of, decent money. I mean, the best game I ever turned in on the tour was a 67. And that, usually, there's par 72. I'm 72, 70, 73, 71. Yeah, I mean, I was right there, but the old pros I was playing against, if they shot a 67, they so-so. They were turning 65, 66. If they shot a 70, they were pissed. But they were so good out there because they were golfing for 30 years while I was wrestling. And, you go out there and you drive somewhere and get up at 7 in the morning for an early tee time. If you hit one bad shot, you might as well get in your car and go home. But I kind of slowed way down because now, I don't want to hurt myself because my golf game went to hell. I can't swing like I used to. I don't want to hurt myself. I do nothing to hurt myself.
That's I use the word disappointed. I'm not disappointed. You're disappointed, but I'm just like, I wish you were still playing. I wish you were going to tell me you still played off scratch at 70 plus.
Yeah, and I still go out once in a while. One of my kids is into golf, and I'll play 9 holes. But I drive the cart to the ball, swing easy, and just to get out of the house and enjoy nature and that, or hit the putting green and chipping. But yeah, not too much. I got this phobia against going back into the hospital for some surgery, or I don't want an artificial knee or an artificial hip, or I can't, pins in my neck. Like some of my friends got all that stuff. I'm scared to death.
Did you ever try out for like a proper PGA qualifier just to see how you did?
I tried a couple of PGA senior tour qualifiers, but just didn't make the cut barely. But you're playing against, Lee Trevino and other, Jack Nicklaus, and never mind.
One of my friends who's a member where I'm a member of, I think he was the best at the course. He's got the course record, and he would always routinely hit 2 under, 3 under. He was really good until it got to the qualifiers, and he always just fell apart. When the pressure was on, it fell apart. I mean, like what percentage of people are that good but fall apart when the pressure's on? In your
thing? God, I really don't know, but I didn't fall apart. I was just 30 years behind the other professionals out there. I was wrestling, they were golfing, so I was good, but just not quite good enough for that.
Longest drive? What's the longest drive you've ever done?
I was pretty good with the driver. I could hit it out there at least a good 270, 280, once in a blue moon, maybe close to 3. But the secret was you want to be in the fairway. It's better to be 270, 280 in the fairway than 300 and in the woods. But, I was good. I was good, but not quite good enough for the pros.
Which of the wrestling personalities, because I'm sure Mean Gene used to play, Pat Patterson used to play, who were the wrestling golfers out there and how were they?
You know what? There really wasn't many golfers. I played with Sting some games. I played Lex Luger, tried it a few times. And it was funny because Lex Luger was horrible, all muscle bound. And he'd play a game of golf, and he stunk. So next week he'd have a new bag of clubs every week because it couldn't be him; it had to be the clubs. But I really didn't play with too many of the guys in those days. Didn't really play golf. They were into working out and stuff. And but I really don't. Yeah, I mean, I had some golf buddies and golf pro buddies that worked in the pro shop, and I got celebrity rate free golf. But not too many wrestlers were into the golf thing.
In the intro, I said, in fact, we were talking just off air as well, and you said, I was known for stalling. And of course, everyone knows you for stalling. And as I said as well, a lot of people wrote in questions for the living legend. And the first one is going to be, these are all YouTube usernames, so if they don't sound like names, that's why. BM says, get Larry to explain the fine art of stalling for heat. So very underutilized in this day and age, and Zbyszko was the undisputed master. So, I mean, there's one thing just doing nothing, but there's another to make it effective.
Well, here was the secret. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, your audience was different. Started changing in the mid-80s with the dirt sheets coming out and a generation that kind of lost the psychology. But I never thought of it as stalling. There was no word like stalling. I think some idiot like Meltzer or someone, made it up. But what I did was I made the audience happy and gave them what they wanted. When I walked in the ring, the whole audience would start chanting, Larry sucks, Larry sucks. And I'd look around like an a-hole, and then I'd maybe go to tie up, but then I'd back away and put my foot over the rope and yell at somebody in the fans. And then I'd go back to tie up, and they'd be going, Larry sucks, Larry sucks. So then I'd jump on the floor and go crab and, complain to the announcer, tell all these people to shut up. And so I wasn't just standing there. I was jumping in and out and talking to this and yelling at that fan. And they were chanting, Larry sucks. If I would have started wrestling, they would have been quiet. So the fans wanted it at the time. My secret of the psychology I got from the old school was no matter what the fans thought about wrestling, especially towards the mid-'80s and late 80s, they believed in real life that I was an a-hole. I mean, they believed everything, the interviews, the way I walked out, the way I did stuff. So there was no such thing as stalling, but I basically, worked the crowd. They wanted to chant Larry sucks. Let them chant. My record, one time I walked in the dressing room and Grizzly Smith looked at his watch and he said, 16 minutes. I went, what? He went, there was 16 minutes before contact. I said, yeah, but the whole audience was going berserk for 16 minutes. If I tied up and started wrestling, they'd all be quiet and watch. Let them enjoy themselves. Tell me I suck.
When did you develop it? In fact, actually, two questions. When did you develop what we now would call stalling? And two, who were your inspirations for working the crowd before contact?
Well, you know what? I mean, it just kind of happened that way. And it wasn't an inspiration. It was the psychology I learned from the old school, from the Brunos and the Monsoons and the Chief J. Strongbows and other guys, about how to get to the crowd. And I got to the crowd in a way, like I said, where they believed I was a real a-hole. So I could work my matches different than other guys could because the fans were going berserk. Just me walking out. Some guy's kid would hand me an autograph book. I'd take the autograph book and instead of signing it, rip it in half and throw it in the air. And, did that piss the crowd off? And poor kid, so they're Larry sucking away. But it was just really a psychology I learned. And, when I first started, I just knew how to take advantage of it and use it. So the fans would get into it because they wanted to do it. So I let them do it. And then some shows, and they might do it for 3 or 4 minutes. And then I'd start, I could feel them coming down. Other fans would go 10 minutes. So I could feel when it was coming down, and then I'd start doing something else. But it was just a secret of psychology I learned from the old school guys. Nowadays, there's no psychology. There's just running amok and flipping and diving and ducking 50 clotheslines and flipping into tables. And I'm glad that happened after I was retired. I mean, you really got a bunch of amazing athletes doing amazing things and dangerous things. But it's really, there's no more good guy and bad guy because everybody's just doing the same stuff, flipping around. Every match is like the same. So it's kind of a lost art, the old psychology. And you got a different audience nowadays, too.
Do you know there's a couple of people still doing it? Roman Reigns, who until recently was champion for 3 years. So in essence, that's old school as well, having such a long reign. And people used to complain, man, his entrance would take so long. He would walk.
I know.
And it's like, but the fans aren't being quiet. At any point, the fans are enjoying it. And then my name is Paul Heyman. And it takes 20 minutes to do 5 minutes worth of stuff. But that's good. Or is it good?
Well, it depends. If the fans are into it, it's good. The only thing is, every entrance takes too long. I mean, it's like the thing about Roman Reigns or any bad guy, if you got a bad guy champion for 3 years, only because every time he's about to lose, 9 Samoans would run out and interfere. But what it does over time is you kill off all the heroes. The bad guy's the champion for 3 years. Okay, who's your hero? Nobody. You kill them all off. So, it's really time to make a new hero.
Well, Cody Rhodes is that hero for now. The other thing I said in the intro is, of course, living legend. We're going to talk about Bruno. How can we not? We'll talk about Bruno a little later. I've got a ton of questions from the fans about the feud, of course. But specifically about the living legend, I know why you called yourself that. It's to stick it in the face of Bruno, of course, on screen.
Well, and the fans.
And the fans.
Because I was so young, me calling myself, I retired. I'm the new living legend. And I'm too young. So they obviously, that just helped me become a bigger a-hole.
Yeah. So who said to you, call yourself the living legend from now on?
Well, 2 things. One, I kind of thought of it myself because, like I said, it made people hate me more because I obviously wasn't even a legend yet. I was too young. But the other thing was Bruno in real life and in his real character, and he was the most beloved guy ever. But he was a very humble man, and he didn't like being called the living legend, which happened at the end of his career. And on television, legends weren't even mentioned yet, because television started in the 50s. So if you watch Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Ernie Banks or somebody, it took 20, 30 years for these guys to get older. Now you're in the 80s before the word legend even came around. But Bruno thought, if he walked out and they go, the living legend, he thought that was being braggadocious. Like he was bragging, I'm so great. So Bruno didn't like being called the living legend. He thought it was bragging. So between that and me knowing it would really help the fans hate me more, I started using it. And then over time, in the 80s and the 90s, I started getting older. So I fit the part. After 30 years or so calling myself the living legend, now I'm old and I look like the living legend. I've been doing it so long it fits.
With that being said, when you started calling yourself the living legend in Crockett or wherever else you may have gone in the 80s, when you were still a bad guy and you were full-time active, did the fans in other territories get the reference as reading through the magazines, or did they just hate you calling yourself the living legend?
Well, they hated me calling that because in the interviews, but back in those days, the only advertising, because it was territories, it was the WWF and then the AWA, the NWA, different areas. But the televisions stayed in their own little territories. And the only news that the wrestling fans got was from the magazines. So even though I didn't wrestle like in the Charlotte, NWA area for a while, when I got there, all the fans knew about me because of the magazines. I was getting all the pub in the magazines. So that I was already known in other territories when I went there because all the publicity came out of New York. So I took advantage of it.
I was going to say, did you ever buddy up to... Was it Stanley Weston was one of the originals before Bill Apter? Am I right? Or am I
Well,
getting names
I
wrong?
remember Bill Apter, George Napolitano was always out there. Those are the two I remember the most. There might have been someone before that, but I really don't remember. What was his name?
But is it like Stanley Weston who used to do the magazines? Hopefully,
I mean, there may have been, but I don't remember. That might if that was before Bill Apter and Napolitano and them, I might have been too young to even,
But did you make it a point to pal around with the people who were involved in the magazines because it's always good publicity and it sort of advertises you outside?
Well, we never palled around with anybody back in the old days, especially if you were a bad guy, because back in the old days, we even had separate dressing rooms. The good guys were in one dressing room, and then across the arena, the bad guys were all in a different dressing room. I mean, the business was really protected, so we never really hung out with everybody. And I had so much heat when people wanted to kill me. I'd wrestle like the match before the last match and then run out the back door with my bag without showering because I was shot at, stabbed, riots, cars smashed, so I wanted to get the hell out of there. I used to have to hide in someone's trunk to get driven into an arena.
We'll get there. I promise you we will get there very quickly before we get to the early days of your career. Dutch Mantell, I do a weekly podcast with Dutch Mantell, and I told him 2 days ago I'm having Larry Zybszko on. And he said, oh, great guy. Really enjoyed him. And then he said, tongue in cheek, he stole my commentary job in WCW. Do you remember the story of that? No, maybe there isn't a story, but...
Well, you know what? There is kind of a story, but I really don't remember the name Dutch Mantell having anything to do with the broadcasting. What happened was the head honchos of WCW changed and Bill Watts came in. And Bill Watts was a real life a-hole. And he was proud of it. No one liked Watts. His idea of the future was promoting Eric Watts, but then no one cared. But what happened was they started the Dangerous Alliance, Bill Watts, with me and Arn and Bobby Eaton and Rick Rude and Stone Cold before he was Stunning Steve back then, and Paul Heyman, was involved. But I didn't want to be part of a group. I wanted to keep my living legend and be a single, because if you're part of a group, you're only as good as the group gets. And Bill Watts was starting to bury the group. I mean, Eric Watts beat Arn Anderson on TV. No one believed it. But so what I did was this. Here's an interesting story. I told TBS, oh, my knee hurts. So I went in and got a knee scope to take out some torn cartilage. So I was sitting at home for a couple of months rehabbing, floating in the pool, and I get a call from one of the producers down at TBS downtown, and they said to me, hey, Jesse the Body just quit. Can you come down and help us out and just do voiceovers over some pre-tape shows we have for the syndicated market? So I went, well, yeah, I'm still getting paid. God bless him. Yeah, I'll come down and talk. Doesn't hurt me to talk. And I never planned on commentating. I never even thought about it. But I went down to the CNN Center and I did, the commentating over a few shows, syndicated shows they had, take Jesse's place. And then the door busted open and one of the producers came running in and went, damn, Larry, you're the best color man we ever heard. And I went, really? And then they said, would you be interested in doing the color? Here, we'll give you this much a year. I almost fell off the chair because those were the days, the timing when Ted Turner and was giving money away like candy. I mean, there was the money war between WCW and the WWE. And I was already at that time maybe 41. So I was getting to the point after 20 years of a career where, yeah, I mean, I won't get hurt. I'm making more money than I ever did in my life being a broadcaster and being an employee with the benefits. So for 10 years, I had a great run because Jesse the Body quit and they called me. And like I said, I never planned to be a broadcaster. It just worked out that way. But I don't remember if Dutch was trying to get the job or whatever.
Well, Dutch had left in mid-91. And I know you're doing bits of commentary here and there before you started doing it full-time. But I thought it was somewhere where they got rid of Dutch and then they replaced you on Worldwide for some syndicated tapings. But I don't know. I don't know the full timings on that one, though. But
I'm not sure. Yeah. All I remember is it was probably around 91 or so, but that's because Jesse the Body quit.
I think
he was doing it.
Yeah, there's years where I think Jesse left in. Weirdly, Jesse was fired in 94. So, but I know you also started full time in 94 with the commentary. I've always heard with Jim Herd that he, for whatever reason, valued the announcers more than the wrestlers, and he would pay the announcers really, really well.
Yeah. It was a gift from God. I said, "You got to be kidding us this morning. I made wrestling."
We're going to go back to the beginning. So, you're named after Stanislaus Zbyszko, a wrestler from the 20s. You are trained by Bruno Sammartino, of course. Where did you first meet Bruno? And also, how did Bruno have the time to train anybody at the time? Was this during when Pedro was the champion and he was like semi-retired?
No, I think Bruno was still the champion, but here's what happened. I mean, I was a big Bruno fan, living in Pittsburgh. Bruno was my hero. And when I was 16 and got my driver's license and my $300 piece of crap car, my first car, I found out Bruno lived a couple miles from my house. If I drove down a certain road, I'd go out of my way a little bit to see if I could see him. And one day I saw Bruno through his big hedges. He had these big hedges around the backyard. I could see him for a second standing by his pool getting a tan, and I couldn't help it. I stopped my car, crawled through the hedges, and he looked at me like, "Oh, here comes a fan," and shook his hand, was very respectful. But the reason I had time to spend with him, because in those days when I met him, Bruno was probably in his 40s. And he was so busy, for years, every day on the road in other countries, Japan, Australia. And this was a time when he was still the champion, I believe, but he only worked on the weekends. He'd only wrestle at the big clubs. He wouldn't do high school shows in Massachusetts or New York or Pennsylvania. But he'd do all the big shows on the weekend, the Spectrum, the Garden, the Boston Garden, Pittsburgh Civic Arena. So he only, was wrestling maybe twice a week at that period in his career. So it just worked out where he had a lot of extra time and we'd work out together. And damn, I went from like 180 some pounds to 245 pounds after a year and a half of doing the Bruno workout, which was heavy weight, low reps, heavy wide grips with the bench, which gave you the chest muscles, and stuff. And I remember my biggest, when I weighed 245 and just started at 21 years old, my bench press record was 465 and a half pounds with the 1 second pause. And back then no one heard of steroids yet. I mean, it was real.
Explain the 1 second pause. So did you actually balance, like put it on your chest? Do you hover it above your chest for 1 second?
Well, no, you'd bring it down and it would stop on your chest for 1 second and then you'd push it off. So what it stopped was bringing it down and bouncing it off your chest to give you help. You touched your chest for 1 second. That meant you're not getting any help. You got to get it off.
Did you ever get involved with the squats and deadlifts and that kind of thing, or were you trying to save your knees at that point?
No, not too much with the length. We do a little running after the workout, but it's really an upper body business, because when you did interviews or work, I mean, guys had legs. If some guy had skinny legs, they'd wear, long tights. But it was really an upper body business because people saw that Bruno look, the big chest, the big arms, the big traps. And when you did interviews, you basically saw him from the tights up. So you never really stared or thought about someone's legs. And like I said, if someone had skinny legs, they'd wear tights.
With I'm wondering if like the Moondogs must have had skinny legs or something. You wore jeans or 3 pairs of jeans.
They wore jeans or something different. Yeah, but it was really an upper body business to be impressive where they looked at you and went, oh my God. I mean,
Did Bruno have the talk with you about how long did it take for you, from shaking Bruno's hand for the first time to starting training with him? Did you have to talk about how pro wrestling worked?
Well, it was a while because I was very respectful and I was an amateur wrestler. And deep down inside of me, and even with the fans back then, I mean, even the fans that would believe it. And when Bruno got blood and fell on the mat, people would get heart attacks. So I was very respectful and never really brought anything up in terms of, well, how do you guys put this together? I mean, I would never say anything like that. So I was very respectful to Bruno and the business. And over time, I let him be the one to decide when I should know stuff and that. Because it was a very secretive business in the old days. I mean, most of the guys on TV now, I see 180 pounds, 190 pounds. They wouldn't have gotten the door.
What was the minimum at the time? Was it like 246.1 or something like that for the WWF?
Kind of depended on how you look, but because Bruno was 265, his opponents, Ivan Koloff 300, Professor Tanaka 300, Killer Kowalski 6'6", 280, George Steele 300 pounds. So all the big bad guys were big guys. And Bruno was a big guy, so you really needed a bigger opponent, like a 300-pound George Steele or something, because that sparked what's natural for humanity, where you root for the underdog. Mm. Now it's to the point where it doesn't matter if you're 220 or 180, as long as you can backflip off the top turnbuckle and crash into somebody waiting there with their arms out to catch you, you're okay.
I know. The bravery is really the person catching, I think.
Yeah, really, move out of the way, dummy.
Now, we're going to go to some WWF stuff. This first question is leading to a second question that a lot of people asked. But Who was invited to dine with Vince McMahon Sr. after the Madison Square Garden shows?
Madison Square Garden. I don't remember dinner after the Madison Square Garden shows. What Vince Sr. did was every few weeks we do television. We do one television, like I think in Philadelphia, and film a few weeks. And then we drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania, because the next day we did a few weeks in the Hamburg arena film TV. But every night after the first television taping and everybody drove to Allentown to stay over at the Abe Lincoln Hotel, Vince Sr. would have a dinner. But it wasn't for everybody. It was, Vince Sr., Vince, the managers, Albano, Blassie, some of his agents, Skolin, Monsoon, Fanini, Bruno would be there. And because Bruno was there, I was invited to be there with Bruno. I was his protege guy. But it wasn't that many more there. It was kind of the inner circle group,
Now, this leads to quite a few people sent this in, but Jason L. has asked, could we please hear the infamous story about, I'm not even going to say the rest of it, Carlo Gambino.
Oh, Carlo Gambino. Well, another story but Bruno knew Frank Sinatra. Years ago, Frank Sinatra was a big Bruno fan. It was on the Italian family thing. And one time, Frank was doing a live concert in New York. And it was either the day before or the day after Madison Square Garden, which was usually on a Monday. So Bruno got the word from Julie Rizzo. Julie Rizzo was like Frank's right-hand man. and he had a club in New York, a little bar club called Jilly's. And he called Bruno and said, "Hey, Frank's in town, would love to meet you and say hi. Love to see you and say hi." So Bruno went, "Oh, yeah, great. Well, we'll stop by Jill, stop by your club." And because he knew Jilly, and say hi to Frank. So Bruno, Dominic DiNucci, Tony Parisi, and me went with Bruno to Jilly's, the club, to meet Frank Sinatra that night. And it wasn't a big place, but it was crammed with people. Frank was in a back room. Bruno went in the back room to talk to him. I was, I didn't get to go in the back room. I was a young guy. But I met Frank Sinatra for a few seconds as he was walking out later. And there was like Shelley Winters was there. Henny Youngman was there. There was some other stars there to, say hi to Frank. And as I'm standing there, and Bruno comes back, and he's sitting on a chair by the bar next to Dominic and them. And as I'm standing there, this little old guy who looked like a skeleton in a suit, and there was a couple of big guys around him, came walking up to me. And this was the era of the Polish jokes. And he looks at me, and in his hand, he's got an empty roll of toilet paper. That brown cardboard thing left. And at one end of the empty roll of toilet paper, cardboard thing, there's matchsticks taped to it. And this little old guy in his suit says to me, "Hey, do you know what this is?" And I went, "No." And he went, "Oh, this is a Polish flash of light." And everybody laughs. And me being the dumb Polak, I went, "Well, you know why Italians don't have freckles? They slide off their face." Nobody laughs. And Bruno's behind this guy sitting there, and he's going like this. Like, huh? I don't know what's going on. He goes, but I got the shut up sign, and they go, and they walk away. His group walks away. So I go to Bruno. I say, "What happened? What was the, shut up sign?" He goes, "Do you know who that little old guy was?" And I went, "No." He went, "That's Carlo Gambino, the Godfather, the one they made the movie about." I'm sure the FBI's got a picture of me leaving Jilly's that night with everybody else. But yeah, I told Carlo Gambino an Italian joke and lived.
The question asker Jason also said, "By the way, anyone who knows anything about La Cosa Nostra knows how lucky Larry was to walk away from that night."
Yeah. Carlo did not laugh.
Do you know, because I've asked, in fact, I interviewed Scott Norton not too long ago. He was a big deal in Japan, of course, and I asked him about, the mafia's involvement in wrestling in Japan, and, every promotion, top to bottom, pretty much they were at some level for quite a while. Was there any mafia involvement in the WWF at any level, or did the guys ever come to the shows?
No, you know what? I don't believe any of the Italian mafia group was involved at all. There might have been some people, because Madison Square Garden is privately owned. It's not owned by New York City. And I remember being in some towns in Japan where I know the Japanese mafia would be the ones promoting the town and running the wrestling events, around Japan. But I never saw, there was never anything in the WWF in that area that I ever noticed, saw, thought of, heard of, with that stuff.
We shall move on. Shady Acre Farm has written in and said, "Loved Larry. Can you ask him how cheap Tony Garea was?"
Super cheap, but in a smart way. And he taught me how to, be smart in a cheap way. And that's why, two or three guys would ride with, together, because back in those days, there was no contracts. You had to pay for your own gasoline, your own motel rooms, your own food. So you really had to be thrifty and, again, be good for the business, because if you didn't sell tickets, you didn't eat. And, so a lot of guys would ride together and charge each other trans, like so much per mile or whatever. And then one guy would rent a motel room, but they'd throw the mattress on the floor, and two other guys would sleep in the same room.
How long were you on the mattress on the floor for?
Well, once in a while, it wasn't too long. I did pretty good. But you know what I started doing was, after a couple of years of living in your car, I got a private pilot's license. And I would rent little planes. So instead of driving, 5-6 hours one way, wrestling, and then driving 5-6 hours back and getting home at 4 or 5 in the morning, I just go down and rent a little plane, and in an hour and a half or so fly, from New Haven to Albany, New York, do the wrestling, get a ride back to the little airport, get in the plane, fly back. I'd be in bed by midnight, and the other guys would be getting back in town at 5 in the morning, And Tony, being cheap, one time, he was afraid of, some guys would fly with me. I took a couple guys now and then, but Tony was afraid. He didn't want to fly with me. So one time we had a show in Albany, New York from New Haven, and I told Tony, well, yeah, I'll drive. It's my turn. I'll drive Friday up to Albany. And Tony went, okay. But I didn't say Albany. He didn't know what time. He had family stuff. So I called him. I said, okay, well, I'll pick you up at 3:30 in the afternoon or 4. And he went, what? Wait a minute, this is Albany. We'll never make it. I said, oh, no, we got plenty of time. I got the airplane. And all I heard from Tony was, you bastard. Because I hijacked him and he wanted to make a payday. So I picked him up. We drove to the airport. He didn't say a word to me. Then he sat in the passenger seat next to me in the plane, and the whole trip to Albany, he sat there and didn't say a word to me. I shanghaied him. Then after the show on the way back, and he realized, my God, we just saved 6-7 hours of driving and time. And, and he started asking me, well, what does this do? And what does this instrument mean? And a few days later, he took off with a flying instructor and checked out getting a license, but he never did.
Terrifying. I flew a plane for the first time a few months ago. It just feels like it's like a small one, feels like it's just going to drop out of the air at any second, at least when you're first starting. Did you not feel the same? Or?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it was a freedom of like being a bird, and I'd fly like, from New Haven down to somewhere by Philly, but you could see the traffic lined up for miles at the George Washington Bridge and the traffic jams in New York City. And I'd be flying over and go right over the Statue of Liberty and fly down. So I really enjoyed it. The one thing I didn't do was, because they had VFR and IFR, and I never went after the IFR. That was to learn special things so you could fly in bad weather. And I would never fly a little plane in bad weather because I just didn't have enough power and blown around like a kite.
Yeah.
But if the weather was nice, it was just a freedom. And at night, it was cool to fly back because you'd see darkness, but you'd see lights of the city. And it was easy to find the airport because the lights would be on the runway. But I really enjoyed it. I flew around the whole country for 20 years. Never crashed.
Well, you usually only crash once in those things, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I never did.
Just sticking on Tony Gurria for a second, I believe he had, and some of the old school wrestlers had a habit of eating raw garlic all day.
Really?
Well, apparently with Tony, yeah. Did you ever see
I really
anyone
don't
do
know.
that?
I mean, I really don't know. I mean, we drove a lot together in the early days, and there's a diner here. We had like stops because we do the same towns every month, and we usually would hit a diner or a Waffle House because after the wrestling show, 10, 11 o'clock at night, there wasn't many places open. You'd find a Denny's or a Waffle House or something, but I don't really remember Tony bringing, a bunch of raw garlic on a trip and eating it. I wouldn't have ate it.
No, you would have remembered, I guess, as well if he'd done.
Yeah, I would have remembered.
It would have been the last trip you made with him, I guess. Now, I want to ask you this. This doesn't directly involve you, but it involves Bruno, but I'd like to get your take, and I suppose Bruno's as well through it. So, Bruno loses the title. We're talking late 70s, of course, to superstar Billy Graham. And then and I don't know how involved you were in deciding this or throwing out suggestions. Bob Backlund then beats Billy. But there was one time where apparently Bruno and Billy almost took it upon themselves to not allow that to happen and to give the title back to Bruno. Do you remember any of this happening at the time?
Well, not really. I mean, in terms of what was going on with Bruno and Billy, because that would involve Vince McMahon Sr. at the time and what was going on in the office with the business at the top level. And I really didn't, wasn't involved with any of that or stick my nose in. The only thing about Backlund was, and he was a good guy, great athlete, but he couldn't follow Bruno. I mean, people thought he looked like Howdy Doody. After, 20 years of Bruno, when Bob Backlund came in with the belt, people would laugh at him. If he beat somebody in Madison Square Garden, God, the people would chant, bullshit, bullshit. In the time when fans would never do that. It just wasn't right. So, and the top guys knew it. And there's probably some guy saying, hey, look at Mr. McMahon. Bob Backlund is not drawing money. And if the top guy doesn't sell out a building, the wrestlers underneath the card, the opening bouts, they don't make as much money. So, and I think Vince knew Bob wasn't a big draw, and a lot of people thought, it was like Howdy Doody. But I think it had something to do with, for like almost 20 years, Bruno being the guy that was the one who called the shots. Was the one who said, okay, I'm going to wrestle a program with George Steele, we'll draw money, or I'll wrestle a program with Ivan Koloff. So I think by the time Bruno retired and quit, the McMahons wanted a puppet. They wanted to do their things, and they wanted somebody who, when they said jump, they would go, how high? And that's what Backlund was. He's kind of just a lucky guy, right place, right time. And again, a great guy, super athlete, but he just couldn't follow Bruno. But that's not really a big knock, because in those days, there really wasn't anybody that could follow Bruno. He was so over and big. The only guy that I thought might have had a chance at that time was Ken Patera, because you got a guy, 290 pounds, an Olympic gold medal winner, and Ken was big and believable and athletic, but that never happened. But there really wasn't anybody that could fill Bruno's shoes. And then later on, the era changed, and Hulk Hogan, became like the new era. But he was a big guy.
Yeah. He definitely, well, yeah, absolutely. Did you ever hear the suggestion that Steve Keirn may have been considered to be the champion after Billy?
Steve Keirn?
Apparently so. Apparently
I mean, there may have, but I don't remember it. And shortly after me and Bruno's big feud, 81 or so, I left the WWF for a while because I didn't want to get buried, but then I went to Japan. But I had to take a couple months off because for a year and a half, I worked my butt off, people trying to kill me. So I went to Japan, a couple tours. And because all the publicity came out of the New York, all the fans in the AWA and the NWA, knew about me. And it was a weird timing thing, because that was the time when the era was changing. The old school era was getting phased out. The days of the territories were numbered. They were going to disappear soon because of nationwide cable. So there wasn't going to be this territory or that territory. There was going to be one nationwide territory because of nationwide cable, and then the beginning of pay-per-view. And it was funny, unfortunately, Vince Sr. passed, but Vince Jr., the young new promoter on the block in those days, he was the one that saw the new era coming, where Vern Gagne, who was a millionaire and, from his territory, was, content doing what he did for, 20 years. And the Crockett's were content with their territory. But Vince was the one who saw the new era and was the one that took off. And then he wound up, where Hogan and Mean Gene and Bobby Heenan and Jesse and maybe some others went from the AWA to the WWF.
Dr. D.
And
Dr. D, Dave
yeah,
Schultz as well. People never bring him
Dave
up, but he was a
Schultz.
big deal as well at the time.
Well, yeah, and then the NWA, you had Piper and Snuka and Steamboat and Macho, so Vince wound up taking everybody's top talent and giving them deals. That was the very start of the contract deals, but it left the other promoters hanging because they didn't see it coming. And they gave me an opportunity because the AWA needed somebody that people knew about, which was me. So I go to the AWA for a while. Then I'd come to the NWA for a while, do something with Dusty or someone. Then I'd go back to the AWA and do something, So I always went up and back because they needed me because the WWE was full of all the top guys that they took. So it just kind of worked out that way because I would have loved to have been in the WWE, but it just never worked out that way. But I did okay because the other territories needed me until finally the territories went under. But Ted Turner bought, and started the WCW. Mm-hmm. And they needed me, and I wound up there with a good deal.
We have one more question before we get to the Bruno feud, and this one stunned me because I don't know the story at all. Dave Studman has asked if I can ask you about Andre throwing you out of a hotel room butt naked.
Yeah, it was a revenge rib. I was. We were. How do you know about that?
I have never heard this before, and someone wrote it in, so I don't know if you said it in another interview or what.
Yeah, you're on the road and things happen. The boys break the boredom. But what happened was we were wrestling towns, and once in a while I would tag with Andre. Andre would beat somebody, and me and Andre would beat the other guys. And when a crowd was cheering, Andre would pick me up by the legs and pick me up over his shoulders. So I'd be up there, and Andre would be waving, and I'd be up in Andre's by his head. He'd pick me up, waving at the fans. We won, yay! And the fans would go berserk. So one show, Andre went to pick me up and do the same thing. But when he picked me up, I went, whoa, 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 and I fell off deliberately. And as I fell off his arm, I could see Andre's face going, whoa, like he thought he couldn't have and dropped me. And then when I'm laying there, like pretending I was knocked out, Andre bent over saying, oh my God. But then I opened my eye and started smiling, and he went, you bastard. So Andre knew I ribbed him, right? So later that night, we're in a hotel room, me, Andre, a few of the other guys, might even been little poker game. Skolin always had a little poker game after his show.
Not cribbage.
Well, sometimes they played cribbage. Cribbage was a biggie. Andre was a big cribbage player. But so there's 5-6 guys in the room. It's the room I was in. And then all I had on was my underwear. And I was walking by where the boys were in the room to go to the bathroom. And when I got there, Andre grabbed me, opened the door, and shoved me out in the hallway. And I tried to fight it, but he grabbed me by the underwear and pulled it off. And now and he locks the door, and I can hear them all laughing in there. And I'm standing there out in the hallway going, oh my God, I'm out in the hallway at the Holiday Inn naked. Open up, you bastards. They were laughing their butts off, and no one was going to go against what Andre did. But that was his revenge for me ribbing him. And then finally someone came and said, you get the manager? And the manager came up, and I'm hiding by the door with my butt sticking out. So that was a revenge rib.
Did you ever get him any other times?
No, I'm not messing with Andre. We played a lot of cribbage together in Japan, riding the bullet train or flying around. Yeah, he loved cribbage.
I always have to ask this. What, in your opinion, was Andre's true height?
No, I really don't know. He was so big. I think they plugged him at 7 feet.
A 7'4" at one point, they claimed.
7'4". I mean, he might have been. I mean, he was probably at least a good 7 feet, 7'1". He might not have been 7'4", but 7'1", 7'2", and he had an afro that was, a foot high, on his head. So he probably looked 8 feet tall when he walked by it. When you walked in the airport, Andre would be walking down the airport, to the next gate. I'd walk behind Andre a little bit, and it was funny because people would be walking towards Andre, but they would never stop and look at him. And Andre would keep walking. But soon as Andre passed them, everybody would stop and turn around. So you watch this parade of people walk by him like nothing's happening. But soon as Andre passed, everybody, stopped and turned around. So there was a line of people turned around behind him, looking at him. But, not when they walked towards him. They just kept going like he wasn't there.
Okay, Red, there's one more thing about his height that I read recently. So, apparently, Andre was always told, never have your photo taken with basketball players. Or maybe one or two others. And a photo got out of... It wasn't Conan the Barbarian, it was the sequel, Conan easy for me to say, the Destroyer. And he stood next to Wilt Chamberlain. And apparently, I don't know if it was Vince Sr. or Vince Jr., but that caused... I don't know if it caused an uproar, but some people were really pissed off that he took a photo with someone taller than him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I never knew that. I really didn't know for sure, and being in the business, whatever, I didn't. But I know Andre, I don't know how tall he was, but he had to be over 7 feet, 7'1", 7'2". And again, with that afro, stuck way up there. But how tall was Wilt Chamberlain?
I think he was claimed 7'2" or something, maybe.
7'2". So he might have been an inch or two taller than Andre.
In the photo, if you look for it, Wilt Chamberlain looks quite a few inches taller than Andre. So maybe, who knows? I mean, between 6'10" and 7'2", how do you even tell the difference when you...
Yeah, what's the difference with the afro? But plus he was a giant. And,
he had a few pounds on Wilt. I'm pretty sure about that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned afro, because we're going to start talking about Bruno, and a couple of people wrote this in as well. Salvatore M has written in and said, did Bruno ever implicitly tell you to not touch the wig?
Yeah. I think that word got out to everybody, but yeah, Bruno, who had hair, as he got older, he was going bald. And in those days, I don't think they had hair transplants yet, but they had weaves, like a wig that they would sew onto your hair that you had left on the sides. And Bruno's theory was, you didn't want anybody to touch the weave and pull it off and all that. But the thing was, Bruno's idea was, if you're going to be in the ring on TV and be a big wrestling star, you want it to always look as good and as youthful as you could. So instead of Bruno coming out looking like an older bald guy, he had the hair weave put on and tell people in the ring, don't touch my hair. Because if you yanked it too hard, you might yank it off. But but that was his psychology behind it. And I always, listen to it in terms of the fans. You always want to look as, young and as good and as healthy as you could so people would believe in you. And that was Bruno's reasoning for doing that. Nowadays, you can shave your head, but nowadays, 9 out of 10 guys all got a beard. I watch the TV, and half the time I can't tell this bald guy with a beard. Is it that bald guy with a beard? Oh, he's got a man bun and a beard. Here's 2 guys with hair and beards. They all got beards. I don't know what the kick is now with the beard.
I know. If you can't grow it on top, just turn your head upside down. And
I guess. But everybody's got a unique feature, your face. And if you cover half your face up with a beard, I don't know who the hell you are.
Did you ever ask Bruno why he went... Because he could have gone for any style. Why did he go for the Marge Simpson sort of starter kit?
What do you mean Marge starter kit?
No, the Marge Simpson. He went for like a sort of like top fade and very curly. Why did he go for that style?
Oh,
was that the TJ Hooker sort of influence at the time?
I never asked him. I mean, didn't know anything about weaves. I knew he did it, and I knew why he did it, but I don't know why he picked that out, or why the hair people picked it out, or I really don't know. That I never questioned
Sure.
Bruno. Why'd you get that wig? And that's very respectful. Yes, sir. No, sir. You know,
Well, I'll stay on it. One more question: did it ever loosen in a match that you were in?
not that I know of, because nobody would touch the wig.
No, wisely so as well. So we're going to get on the Bruno feud. How could we not? So you begin as the apprentice of Bruno Sammartino on screen as well as off, and then you challenge him to a match. You don't get the better of him legally, or you sort of, I suppose technically you do in a sense, because you sort of like knee him in the old breadbasket while he's holding the ropes open for you.
Well, that was cheating. Yeah, he
Yeah.
held the ropes to be nice, and then I cheated.
And then you throw the referee out, and then you hit him with the wooden chair. I actually watched it just before we started chatting, and I thought, man, a wooden chair as well at the time. That's dicing with concussions. You know, a wooden chair. It's hard to sort of make it look good and not hurt too bad. Is there a trick to it?
No, you know what? I mean, I'd never practiced that. Back in the old days, it was rare that you'd hit someone with a chair. I mean, like nowadays, there's chairs and kendo sticks and tables. I mean, whatever you need is under the ring. Just look under the ring and pull out a bazooka or a table or a kendo stick or a sword, whatever. But back in those days, it was rare. So, I mean, no one practiced it. I just tried to make it look as good as I could without hurting them. But it had to look good. You wanted it to look good. And it was weird because after that match, normally there'd be a riot, but it was so, even Vince said it was the feud no one saw coming. But people were in shock. I mean, when I walked out of the ring and Bruno laying there in a pile of blood, there was no one yelling boos or screaming. They were all sitting there with their mouths open like, what? I mean, they were in complete shock. A few days later, when the TV showed, because this was in Hamburg for TV, a few days later after the TV showed is when I started realizing, oh my God, I drove my car to a town. I came out, my car was smashed. Windows, mirrors hanging, lights smashed, key gouges. Yeah, I mean, it worked. People hated me.
Did you watch it back? Because when I saw it, obviously no one will have really realised, but I did actually notice Bruno do the cut and then put it in his trunks, and that made it onto TV. Did you ever see that and watch that back?
You know what? To be honest with you, I may have seen that once, and I'd always thought to myself, well, that's a stupid camera angle. But yeah, it looked like something, but
unless you knew what you were looking for, how could you ever put two and two together in that sense, I guess?
Yeah, but that's one of these buried secrets that I can never talk about.
No, that's fine.
Sealed in the secret documents next to my Corvette. So.
I shall swiftly move on then to some fan questions. Halsey has asked, was it scary to have so many fans suddenly angry at you after your iconic turn on Sammartino? And I'll add this, were you prepared for the vitriol?
Well, the first few days caught me off guard. Like I said, I pulled up and my car was smashed. I walked out of Albany one time and there's someone shot at me. I mean, boom, this big boom goes off like a shotgun hit the top of the door and the bricks. Like I feel little brick pieces hitting me in the head. And I started realizing, oh my God. I mean, it got so much heat, more than I could even, thought was going to happen. And then right after that, I started hiding, and I'd meet somebody somewhere down the road, but I would hide in a trunk and be driven into the arena and then get out of the trunk before the show started. And then, I mean, that's when I started carrying a gun, because one time I was going down the highway, and I'm going down the highway in the daytime. I'm driving from New Haven to somewhere in Massachusetts. And all of a sudden, a car's next to me, kind of a beat up big car. And there was like 5 guys in it. One guy was hanging out the back window, waving a big knife. And the car was trying to, move over into me to push me off the road. And I kept on going, what the hell? And they're yelling something. So I reached under the seat and pulled out the 45 and went boom. And I shot it over their hood because I didn't want to hurt anybody, but I figured that scared them. And the 45 over the hood, boom, they took off and left me alone. But then I wised up quick. Like I said, I had to sneak into buildings, get there early, hide in trunks. It was an interesting experience.
Did during any of these times where you're getting shot at or trying to get run off the road or getting stabbed, did you ever think to yourself, job well done, and actually take it as a compliment, or were you just fearing for your life?
Well, I did. I mean, I didn't realize it got over so much more than I even thought it would, because I was still kind of a young guy, but it really got over more than I thought it would. But it wised me up quick to, some things. And 1980, and then probably a good couple of years of that. But that's when everybody would chant, Larry sucks, Larry sucks. So I could, do what they call stalling, but it wasn't stalling. People really meant it. I sucked. And then in the mid-'80s, it started to change. You had to start getting a different, younger, new audience, and you had the dirt sheets out, and people were saying, well, wait a minute, I don't know, is all this on the level? What's going on? Things just started to change. But I was still like the only guy left that the people would still, Larry sucks, because I had them believing that in real life, forget the wrestling, whatever you thought about wrestling, it didn't matter.
Well, they believed in Bruno, so therefore they believed in you.
They believed in Bruno, and they believed I was a real a-hole in real life. And that was the secret.
Now, this is
so they could do this. You could do boo on me.
Do you know, because you've shown the T-shirt, I'm going to skip a question and go, Sunview, what's the backstory behind Larry recording the song Boo on Me in 1980? It's a great song.
Oh, God, someone knew that?
Oh, yeah.
But you know what? 1980, that's when everybody hated my guts. And I knew some guys, a couple of young guys that were starting a little sound studio in their basement. So I wrote and sung this song and I called it Boo on Me. And I did it in one take, sung it in one take. And it was just a spur of the moment thing. And the guys, put some music. I told them, I said, well, put some of this music in, because I didn't know anything about music. So some of the guys made up some music, and we put together this record, which wasn't bad, Boo on Me. And then it was on YouTube. I don't know how it got on YouTube. It's been on YouTube forever. I didn't put it on. But the interesting thing that now I got this shirt because a guy at Pro Wrestling Tees, company that makes shirts, was a fan. But we made a movie at the end of 2019, right before the COVID crap, called The Unbreakable Bunch. And the director heard the song Boo on Me and was going to use it at the end of the movie when the credits were going up. And then there's one line in the movie where I'm shooting some aliens and going, Boo on me, you parasite. So one of the guys from Pro Wrestling Tees sent me this shirt, bright yellow with the big Boo on Me, which I figured would be good for protests nowadays.
There's so many
protesting. Of them. Yeah, you don't like what I'm protesting? Here, Boo on Me. But
was there any records sold? Did anyone actually sell any?
Well, I never had any records to sell. Back in 1980, there was no such thing as merchandising. There was no action figures yet. There was, nothing like that. So nothing really happened with it. I had some 45s made and sold a few 45s, which over the years I've autographed, but they're extremely rare. It's got a big hole in the middle of the 45 record. But I never really, when I think back over the years when I was wrestling, I could have, when the music started, I could have used it for my entrance music, Boo on Me. But duh, stupid. I never, never used it.
I'll give you a couple more Brunos and then we're going to play a little game. So, Where was I before? Yes, Christy Show Live has written in and said, what was your favourite match with Bruno? And then I'm going to add in, how many matches did you actually have with Bruno?
Well, the exact number I don't know, but there was a program. I mean, I think we had maybe 2 matches or so at Madison Square Garden, which led to me running out of the last match, and that's what led to the cage match. So I couldn't run away. That was the build-up. The cage matches were pretty rare back then. But that's what led to the cage match, was me running away from Bruno in the garden. But now I'm in a cage at Shea, and I couldn't run away. But we wrestled, 2 or 3 times in Pittsburgh, 2 or 3 times in Philadelphia. We had a classic match in the Philadelphia Spectrum one time when I went to hit him with a chair again. He ducked, but the chair hit the rope, came back, and I basically knocked myself out. But it was like 2 or 3 times in each big club, like a program. And then it ended with the biggie cage match at Shea Stadium.
I'm going to move on to David Sammartino, and I'd like to get your opinion on why David seemed to struggle to get anywhere near as much of a foothold as his dad did in the business.
Oh, well, but David, the problem I think David had was, again, Bruno was so big of a star and had such a powerful, believable look that you couldn't follow him. Bob Backlund couldn't follow him. And David, he wasn't big enough. He didn't have the look like his dad. So it's like, I think he kind of got very emotionally disappointed and stuff, because people just wouldn't buy him because he just couldn't follow his dad. His David was, 6'1", 290, and looked like his dad, and maybe, but he was smaller, and he just couldn't fill his dad's shoes, and I think it just got very depressing for him.
Do you think, would you have advised him, if he was going to take the advice, just to change your name, go somewhere else? Would that have worked?
I don't know. Because I was with Bruno and David was, I didn't want to get involved in any family business, So, I had some matches with David, and we had great matches. He was great in the ring. But he just couldn't fill the shoes, and I think it got to him because, he couldn't accomplish his dream.
Yeah.
So
I'll go a couple more on Bruno, then we'll play our first game. Well, probably our only game we're going to get to. Spider Sense has said, please ask Larry about International Wrestling, the small promotion that Bruno was involved in that he worked after his WWF run.
Yeah, if I remember, just a little bit, I think Dominic DiNucci was involved with somebody, and they tried to start a promotion out of New Jersey, maybe, that area. I can't remember the other guy's name because I was in other territories, and I did some shots for that group, but it didn't last long. I think it was, like Dominic trying to start up a group or something with somebody, and Bruno helping him. I think he was doing the commentating for him, something like that.
Did you ever wrestle for Bruno in his Pittsburgh territory, or had that already closed up by the time you got in the business?
Well, you know what? Bruno owned Pittsburgh for a while, and that's when I started. And actually, there was one of the Mongols, Guido Mongo, I think, bought it from Bruno, the Pittsburgh little territory, which was not the WWF or anything, but it was just Pittsburgh and the towns around Pittsburgh, Altoona and Johnstown or whatever. It was a small thing, but I don't think Bruno messed with it. I don't think he messed with it that long. It got engulfed with the WWF territory, which kind of ended around Pittsburgh, that far west of New York.
Back in the day when you were a kid, were you a fan of the Batman?
Oh, the Batman?
Yeah. Who was it? Tony Marino or something, was it?
Yeah, Tony Marino was his name. To be honest with you, I was such a big Bruno fan And it was nothing against the Batman, but yeah, I mean, I don't remember ever going, "Oh wow, Batman! Yeah, maybe I should wear a cape and do something." I mean, it just never dawned on me. I was into the believable, real life character like Bruno was, other guys.
Now, because I'm bringing up the Pittsburgh territory, I used to do a podcast with Don Morocco, and he always had the idea that Bruno had fallen out with Vince McMahon originally because there was some issue where they were arguing over the Pittsburgh territory or issues between them over that. Did you have any idea of this? Or something
I really don't know. I mean, I wasn't involved in any business end, but at my young stage of the game. So I really don't know what was going on. But like I said, eventually Pittsburgh became part of the WWF. So I'm sure Bruno and Vince worked something out.
Now we will get to name association. We're skipping the AWA. We're skipping. Well, to be honest, we're skipping loads of stuff. Really, we're going to do a game, and we'll see how much time we've got left and how sick of you are of me, and to see how much more we ask. But anyway, name association. I'm going to give you a sentence, a description, and you tell me the first name that comes into your mind, and it can be from any era, any locker room, as long as you knew the person and worked with them. And the first one is the funniest person in the locker room.
Funniest person in the locker room. Mm-hmm. You know what? The name and the face that come into my mind is Bobby Heenan. He was a trip. I mean, he was always funny. And he was one of the guys that if we were driving somewhere, we'd say, "Hey, Bobby, you want to come with us?" Because we wouldn't even charge him trans because we knew he'd be laughing all the way up and all the way back. But Bobby Heenan, I think, was probably one of the most entertaining, funny guys in the locker room ever.
He's an underrated ribber from stories I've heard. Everyone will say Fuji or Kurt Hennig or something, but I believe Bobby Heenan had his moments as well.
Well, Bobby was I don't know, Bobby. I don't know if he ribbed that much, yeah, but then Mr. Fuji, he had a bad reputation for ribbing people. I mean, if he ribbed you, you'd go, "Huh," but you would never rib him back because you did not want the Fuji revenge rib. One time, I think this is in my book, we were flying to Japan. Haystacks Calhoun is taking up one whole row, and Fuji pours a bunch of X-Lax in Haystacks' drink when he wasn't looking. So, 13-hour flight, whatever it is, halfway through the flight, Haystacks is dying to go number 2 in the bathroom. Now we're on Japan Airlines flying to Tokyo. Calhoun's getting up and he's dying to go. He's so big, 600 pounds with an ass the size of a car. There's no way he could fit inside the door to an airline bathroom. So he waddled to the back of the plane and they pulled the curtain back. And I felt sorry for these stewardesses. There's 2 Japanese lady stewardesses. They were holding a big, garbage bag under his ass while he was taking a crap. And you could hear it. But then pretty soon the smell was coming out into the back of the plane. Can you imagine a 600-pound crap? And Fuji did that. I thought that was one of the funniest things. But if you fell asleep in the dressing room, Fuji would take 3 or 4 strips of tape and lay them over your boot and then light it on fire. So you'd be laying there, all of a sudden you'd look up and you had a giant hot foot with a big fire on your boot and smoke and jumping. He was always pulling some kind of a rib. Kurt Hennig was kind of a ribber, but I think Fuji takes the cake.
I think because, as I said before, I had a podcast with Morocco, and he'd tell me so many stories about Fuji. And the worst thing was he'd be talking to you, and you couldn't understand what he said either because he was speaking Fujianese.
Yeah, he was a classic, and him and Tanaka were a hell of a team together. And Professor Tanaka was a character in his own right, but Fuji was a trip. Yeah.
I'm going to skip
Is he still living, Mr. Fuji?
No, he died quite a few years ago.
Is Tanaka still living?
Hang on. Let me look. Let me look.
Google it. I don't know.
Professor
probably.
Tanaka, he died in 2000. Wow.
Oh, okay. That's 24 years ago.
Yeah, at the age of 70. So there you go. Right, we'll move on to the next one. I'm not going to ask you the last man standing at the bar because you're not a big drinker. So,
I never drank my whole adult life.
No. So you're not the one to ask someone, so I'm going to skip this one and go to your favourite Nitro girl.
Well, you know what? There was a couple of them that we had fun time with because on the road, you go on the road. And AC Jazz, the little blonde chick, she was a sweetie. And her friend Terry, who was fired, a redhead. We'd go out sometimes if we went to a town after the town, me and AC Jazz. And sometimes Fire, we'd go to the casino, play a little blackjack and 3-card poker and have some fun. And one time when they did some pay-per-view by Mount Rushmore, the motorcycle thing, me and AC Jazz and Terry went to the Mount Rushmore and got pictures of us, But there was a couple of them, yeah. AC Jazz and Fire. We would go out. Nothing weird. I was married, but they were more fun to hang out with them than the guys.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Next one, smelliest wrestler.
The smelliest.
Aside from Haystacks Calhoun on a flight.
Yeah, aside from that. You got a dressing room full of big guys, some of them sweating. I don't know if you could tell where the smell was coming from because you had a bunch of guys in the dressing room. I never really noticed a smelly guy.
Oh, I'll move on. I'll move on then.
To be honest with you, yeah.
Because you said you carried a gun. The wrestlers who also carried a gun with them.
I don't know. I really don't know. Back in those days, in this, 80. I'd carry a gun because I started getting, scared of getting shot at and stabbed in cars. But back in those days, I just put one in my bag and walk on the airplane and put the bag in the overhead. There was no, TSA. But then when the TSA started, you couldn't do that anymore. So I kind of left the gun at home. I was never really big into guns. I never had a rifle or a shotgun or got into that. But for self-defense, I'm very good with a handgun. And at my stage now, unlike Hunter Biden, I didn't lie on my federal background check. I have a concealed carry license. So sometimes even now I go out because if my car breaks down or something weird happens, I look like a helpless old guy. But you don't want to mess with me because I'll have something under my shirt.
Yeah, you're packing heat.
Yeah, legally.
Yeah, legally. Most dangerous situation you've found yourself in? I'm talking riots and that kind of affair.
Well, the one riot I got stabbed in, there was like riots kind of regularly. And sometimes I would do things not to cause a riot. And other times something would happen if you screwed the baby face. I remember the time I got stabbed, I was wrestling Ivan Putski. And I'm in the ring with Ivan Putski, sometime Poughkeepsie or somewhere, I can't remember. But we were in the ring wrestling, and I was hated as, during the Bruno thing. But Bruno didn't make the smaller show, so I was wrestling Putski, who was over pretty good at the time. And we're in the ring, and there's some fan in the front row who didn't like Putski. And during the match, the guy would say, "Hey, Putski, your mother's ugly." And Putski would just ignore it. Then the guy would say, "Hey, Putski, your daughter's ugly," or something, And then Putski would ignore it. Then all of a sudden, the guy said one time, "Hey, Putski, you're short." Well, Putski blew up, jumped out of the ring, and started fighting and pounding this fan that was yelling at him these things. But when he said, "You're short," Putski flipped. So when Putski was coming back in the ring, I figured after the fight with him and the guy and the fans going nuts, when he came in the ring, I kicked him, threw him down, and curled him up I said, let's just get the hell out of here. 1, 2, 3. I won because I kind of cheated when he came through the ropes. And then I left, and that's when one riot started out where I'm walking through the crowd, and all of a sudden, boom, I get hit on the head with something. And I turned around, and I was going to hit the guy that hit me, but it was like a guy 80 years old with crutches, and he picked up a crutch and hit me on the head with it. And then when I turned around to grab him, I couldn't bring myself to punch out some old 80-year-old guy. But the secret to get back to the dressing room was to act crazy. So people go, what the hell? But right after I turned around and didn't punch the guy, all of a sudden it felt like someone kicked me in the ass. And I went, yeah, and I turned around again, and the couple cops grabbed somebody and took him away. And I acted crazy and went to the dressing room, and there's Skolin and Andre playing cribbage. And Skolin says, well, it sounded good. I went, yeah, no, the people were into it. I said, but someone's kicked me in the ass. And I put my hand back on my ass cheek, and I feel this like piece of metal. And I go, what the hell? And I pull it, and I pull out a blade about this long. It was a long, skinny little blade. I don't know if you ever saw them, but they used to have these knives, I think from Japan, where they were wood, like, a piece of wood, but it was a handle, and you could slide the handle part out of the wood, that covered the blade, and the blade was long and skinny. So when I turned, I broke the blade off in my butt. The scary part to me was they all said, well, you should go to the emergency room and get a tetanus shot. I went, oh, God, that's what scared me the most. Was sitting there getting a needle stuck in me for a tetanus shot. But there was an old trick to some of the gangs and people with knives was they take a knife and stick it in a raw piece of meat for a week. And then they pull the knife out without wiping it off, put it in a sheath or whatever, and bacteria would grow on whatever they stuck it in for a week. So if they stabbed you with it or sliced you with it, you'd get a hell of an infection, So I got the tetanus shot, and that was scary.
Supposedly that's how Ricky Dozan was killed.
Ricky Dozan?
Yeah. Or near enough, remember. Anyway. Yeah, a bacteria-covered knife, apparently. Anyway, we will move on. Who has the best working punch in wrestling?
Who had the best working punch? God. Back in my day, there wasn't a lot of punches. Like today, the guy will get you, and they'll punch you 10 times and then go to throw you in the corner when you should fall down because you got punched out. But back in those days, it was like a wrestling match. So if the bad guy got you in the corner and punched you once or twice, the referee would break it up because you weren't supposed to punch it. It was a wrestling match. But I really don't remember, to be honest with you, saying to myself, oh, this guy punches the greatest, because we never really paid that much attention to it because it wasn't done a lot in the old days. Cheap shot here, a couple punches here. If you were in the corner, the referee would break you up. Nowadays, I don't know what the hell the rules are. You punch a guy 10 times in the corner, then they go to throw him in, and the guy reverses them. So the 10 punches mean nothing. So, it's just like too much.
Super kicks. That's the new 10 punches in the corner. 48 super kicks a match, and none of them actually get to the pinfall. We'll move on. Who's the clumsiest wrestler you ever remember taking on?
Oh, God, the clumsiest. You're coming up with some good questions there, James. The clumsiest. God, try. The clumsiest. I really don't know because back in my day,
they were all
we
good.
Didn't do well. We all knew how to work. It wasn't like today where every match you do 100 different things, going through too much, too quick, no one sells nothing. But back in the old days, we didn't do that much. Punches were clumsy. I mean, I really don't know, to be honest with you.
I will move on then. So you're okay. The best commentator you ever worked with?
Oh God, I mean, there were some good ones. I mean, Tony Schiavone was great to work with. When I did Nitro with Tony, he was a night off. When I worked with JR on some shows, he was great. I mean, Schiavone, Ross, and then I did some things. Actually, I started with Gordon Soley before Gordon died. Did some shows with Gordon Soley, and he was from the day of the one-man announce team days. In the old days, it was just one announcer. So, between Gordon Soley, Schiavone, JR, they were all easy to, work with.
The nicest person in wrestling, and you can't say yourself.
The nicest. They're all nice, but I mean, to me, Bruno popped in because he was nice enough to take me under his wing when he didn't have to do it. He could have just said, "Hey, kid, here's an autograph. Get out of my yard. Thank you. I got to go now." But he really helped me in my career and gave me the biggest break of a lifetime when he didn't have to do it. So I guess to me, the nicest guy, to me, I have to say Bruno.
And a fine answer as well. Fine answer.
Yeah.
The most high-strung, as in edgy or nervous?
I don't know why. I don't know why I'm saying this. Like Johnny Valiant, one of the Valiant brothers. Yep. Johnny was a character, and they do the interviews, him and Jimmy, the Valiant brothers. And Johnny was good. I mean, he'd do a good interview. Then they'd go to Jimmy, and all Jimmy would say is, "Dink, dink, bink, bink, be there, girls." And that was it. But Johnny was kind of a nervous kind of guy, always doing stuff fast. And the reason that pops in my mind is because of the way he got killed. He took a bus or something and got off in Pittsburgh where he lived. And for some reason, went across the street the wrong way and got ran over by a bus. So he's in a different world, and not even thinking what the hell you're doing. You walk out in front of a bus. When I was in England, I almost got ran over because, you drive on the other side of the road. So I'm in a hotel, and there's a fish and chips place across the street. So I look, I go, oh, so I take a step, and I look to see if anybody's coming. No one's coming, so I take a step in a row. Beep! And I don't, because they're coming from the other direction. So I almost stepped out in front of a car in England because it's the opposite side. So I was very careful. I couldn't drive in England because sooner or later I'd get in a wreck.
Oh, that's why I won't drive in America.
Yeah, well. You get so used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny, my cousin did that. He was from Spain. He got too drunk, walked in the middle of the road. He looked the wrong way. Car ran him straight over, broke his leg.
Oh, God,
so
yeah.
It does happen. It does happen. The most miserable wrestler to hang around in the locker room always had an Eeyore the donkey face.
The most miserable? God. Well, you're coming up with some tough questions. Most miserable.
I've got a couple of easy ones next if you...
Yeah, I'm trying to say. I mean, I never really miserable because all the guys in the dressing room, which in my day wasn't a lot because there was no wrestling schools, there was no indie shows. They really didn't want you in the business. They needed you sitting out with the ticket stuff. So if we didn't sell tickets, we didn't eat. So guys that would make it into the dressing room, unless they got caught cheating on their wife or something, I don't know if they'd be miserable.
It's okay.
But I really don't know anybody that was miserable. They were like happy to be there, most of them,
Okay, I'll ask you this one then. You don't have to tell me the number, but the biggest single payoff for an event.
For me?
Yeah, so what was the event?
I think the two biggest paydays I got, along with the big contract, was during the New World Order. I mean, I'm the guy that influenced the name the New World Order. And I'm the one who programmed the beginning of the whole New World Order, the way Scott Hall came in, and then this and that. And then it got so big, Eric wanted to be involved. And I could tell people wanted me to wrestle Scott Hall. We said, you could feel it. So I did a pay-per-view, one with me and Eric to save Nitro, and one with me and Scott Hall. And those two pay-per-views were like two of the highest buy rates WCW pay-per-views ever did. And I got a good payday for each, could have been about 50 grand for each, plus the contract I had. So that was probably about the biggest, for those days. I made a big payday in 1980 for Shea, but back in those days, 25,000 was a lot of money compared to 1997.
Yeah, but inflation, that's probably about the same then.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah, with inflation nowadays, it's like, feel sorry for the young people growing up. Their rents are going up for no reason.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
best enhancement talent you ever wrestled.
Enhancement. An enhancement talent, someone that would make you look good.
Jobber. But I always say enhancement first because some people don't like jobber as a phrase.
Yeah, there was some guys around New York who basically made a living. They were never the big superstars, but they were always on TV having a great match. There was a guy named Johnny Rods who lost a lot, but he was really great in the ring. Jose Gonzalez kind of lost a lot, but he was great in the ring. If I think about it, there might have been more other territories, probably had them too. You went to territory, they'd have, a guy like that was great in the ring, but never really won. But I don't know, Johnny Rods was one I remember from the New York area, and I'm trying to think if there's any others that stick out in my mind. I mean, guys like Bobby Eaton were great, but he was never like a world champion, but he was always a tag team guy or putting someone over that was good. And, guys like that.
How about this one now? The smoothest worker you ever wrestled? Almost made it look too easy.
One of the smoothest guys, and I don't know if he made it look easy, but look good, but one of the smoothest guys was Nick Bockwinkel. Nick Bockwinkel was a smooth old pro, and I met him, and I did some, matches and programs with Nick Bockwinkel, and he was, very smooth. He was great to be in the ring with, the old timers. But there was a few of them. Snooker was smooth in the ring. I had a great match with Don Morocco. Someone showed me not too long ago, and I'm thinking, God, that was great. Look at that visual I did. That was great getting hung up. But Don Morocco was good. Yeah, my brain is going to be going all day. God, I should have said this to James.
Hey, well, there's always a part. I didn't tell you this before.
Boo on me.
Boo on you. I never told you this, but I over-prepare for these things, and I wrote 7 pages worth of questions. So there's a part 3, and we can have like a redo of all these after thinking about it. Because you mentioned Nick Bockwinkel, easy for me to say again. There were a couple of Nick Bockwinkel questions I wanted to throw at you. So Chris says hi, says, how was Nick Bockwinkel in and out of the ring? I feel he's kind of underrated nowadays and not enough talk about his greatness as a heel. His promos are amazing, same with his in-ring work. And also, can Larry talk about the time... Oh, no, that's something else. So, okay. Underappreciated, apparently.
Well, maybe, but, Nick was a big star, spent most of his career, I believe, in the AWA territory. And then when the new era came with the pay-per-views, and I think Nick was getting a little too old at that time for that era. But Nick was great in the ring and a great, old school wrestler that was easy to be in the ring with. His interviews were smooth. And he was a character. I remember one time he invited me, Steve Regal, not the English Regal, another Steve Regal.
Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had, Nick had his wife with him. He just bought a new boat and invited us to go take a ride on Lake Minnetonka in Nick's new boat. So he pulls the trailer down, puts the boat in the water, and his wife is sitting on the boat in the chair, and Nick gets in the boat and starts backing it up. Steve Regal took the car and trailer and parked it a little bit up in the lot. And all of a sudden, we're standing there, and all of a sudden, there's water coming up our ankles. And I'm going, Nick, what's going on? And Nick is sinking his boat. I mean, it's the kind of guy he was. There's some kind of screw on the back of the boat where after you use it, if you got water in it, you'd unscrew this plug and let the water out of your boat. But Nick never put the plug back in. So there was this big hole. When he put the boat in the water, it started filling up with water. So when Mr. Electricity made it back to get to the boat, we're yelling, go back and get the trailer, the boat's sinking. So Nick invited us out to go on a boat ride, but then sunk his boat. But we got it out just in time before it got too much.
You don't want Mr. Electricity and water mixing. That sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, double shock.
Reese Curry has also asked about Nick. Please ask him for his memories of Nick Bockwinkel, especially his face turn, which had to be done twice. The second being in Winnipeg. What happened there?
Oh, my God. I don't know.
No.
I was in and out of the AWA a couple times, and, I worked a hell of a program with Nick, but then he got a little old. And then when I had the AWA championship, we'd bring in different guys. I'd work a program with Sergeant Slaughter or Morocco or Harley Race. But and Winnipeg was one of the towns they ran. But I really don't remember any of that stuff because I was either into my own thing the wrestling, even though you were a bunch of wrestlers, it's like you had your own life and enjoyed your own privacy too. So I never paid attention to a lot of things with other guys because you're on the road so much that when you weren't on the road, you didn't want to think about it. You wanted to go home and enjoy your family and do your own thing. And, so, the fans are asking questions about things they noticed, but I never noticed them. Too busy living a life and traveling.
Well, you'll notice this one then. The most legitimate tough badass.
Well, the couple names that stick to my head that I heard about when I started was Carl Gotch. And the other one was Billy Robinson. And they were two shooters, old school hookers from Wigan, England. Mm-hmm. Wigan, England had a reputation of that's where the guys would go to learn how to really hurt you. And Carl Gotch was like an obsessive guy who knew how to hurt you. And Billy Robinson was kind of a crazy guy. If he had a few belts, don't mess with him. Because, he was hurt. But there was an old saying, if you're a biggin, you came from Wigan. but Wigan was the place that really turned out the really super tough shooters that knew how to hurt you. Guys who wouldn't want to piss off. In the ring.
Yeah, it's only
there might have been some other ones. A old guy when I first started from Wigan named John Foley.
Yeah.
Out in Vancouver, British Columbia. He was kind of an older, smaller guy when I started, but he was still wrestling. Vancouver. And I'd do him a favor because he didn't have any money, but I'd take him to the town in my car and wouldn't charge him nothing. And in return, we'd get there a little early, and then I'd get in the ring with him, and he would show me all the Wigan hooks and how to break a wrist, how to pop an elbow, pull a shoulder. And these guys were tough bastards. But Carl Gotch is one of the biggie names that stick out along with Billy's. And there's probably some other ones too that, don't pop in my mind right now.
Were you ever in a territory where they would invite fans into the ring before the shows? Someone would say, oh, they're not that tough, I could do this. And then, they get to find out what it's all about.
They would invite fans into the ring?
Yeah, but this is like pre a show. So, there's people like, I think Bob Backlund probably did it, J.R. Foley did it, Bob Roop did it, these types where fans would challenge wrestlers who, wanted to try and get into the business.
Sometimes, I mean, Roop was another one that knew how to hurt you good. And the only thing I remember about like before a show was I popped the guy's knee out. I felt bad, so I never hurt anybody again. But what would happen is you get the local promoter and you'd have some fan that would annoy the hell out of the promoter about wanting to be a wrestler. So the promoter, when he was annoyed enough and said, "Oh God, all right, show up at 3 o'clock and we'll put you in the ring and see what you got." So the fan would say, "Okay." So they'd show up early. And this happened for years. It was part of the business in the old days where, okay, the fan would show up, he's standing in the ring, and the promoter would send out Carl Gotch and go wrestle this guy a couple minutes, and you know the deal. So the guy would look over and see some guy who really didn't like have a bunch of muscles or anything, but he had no idea what a shooter was. So a couple minutes later, the guy's arms broke. And he goes, "Okay, I give. Oh, God, you guys really are tough." And the promoters like this because then the guy would go back to his neighborhood with a broken arm and say, "Yeah, I went in the ring with this guy and I thought he was like an old skinny guy, but he broke my arm." But those guys are for real. So it was like good for business in a way. But that was the thing in the old days where if a fan annoyed a promoter too much, "Yeah, come here early and get in the ring with this guy. We'll see what you got. Good luck."
Did anyone in your early career try and shoot on you, or at least semi-shoot on you, or control you a bit more than you thought they should?
No, to be honest with you, they really didn't. And I had something that when I was young, I didn't even realize I had, but I had politics on my side. I mean, guys, whether it was Strongbow or Monsoon or somebody or some of the wrestlers, they would go, "Oh yeah, that's Bruno's guy." So because I was like Bruno's protege and Bruno's guy, people were nice to me. I mean, guys like Monsoon and other guys who may not even talk to some of the guys, or deal with them, just run the show. But everybody was I think nicer to me because it was the politics where I was Bruno's guy, and I didn't really realize why some of the older guys were helping me out more, or being nice or whatever. I kind of realized it down the road it was just politics, you know.
The last one here is most memorable backstage fight, if you ever saw one.
Oh God. It wasn't backstage, it was in a bar, I think.
That will do. That will do.
I never drank. So I rarely ever went to a bar because there'd be drunks. And then if the wrestlers there, if some of the guys, were drinking, some fan would say, "Hey, I don't believe you're real." And then there'd be a fight, breaking out. Well, I knew this guy. He was around. He was The Rock's grandfather, Chief Peter Maeva. And he looked like a gorilla. I mean, he was probably close to 300 pounds, but no fat, just like a gorilla with a big head and a big neck. And he had a big mouth with a lot of teeth, it looked like, like a gorilla. And one time, him and Billy Robinson got into an argument. They were both half schnockered in a bar, and they both jumped up at each other. And Billy grabbed the Chief and threw him down on the ground. But what Maivia did, and I seen him do this to a truck driver in a parking lot with Gorilla too, it didn't matter if you threw Chief to the ground because he'd have his arms around you, right? And what he would do was eat you. He would be biting chunks of flesh out of your chest with these giant teeth. So Billy Robinson takes him down. The next thing you know, Billy Robinson is screaming, "Oh my God, get him off me, get him off!" And his shirt's all bloody and there's skin hanging. And I seen Maivia do this to a trucker in a truck stop. He wasn't he just eat you. But me and Gorilla, we hit a truck stop, we're getting gas, and here pulls in this big Lincoln driven by Maeva, the Chief. And the Chief has no idea how many cylinders a car has. I mean, he doesn't know. he stopped there and he's sitting in his car parked because his wife or daughter, someone had to run into the truck stop for something. And he's sitting there with his car facing where the trucks were parked, where the truckers, truckers were all facing towards his car. And he had his bright lights on, shining into the couple truck windows. And he has no idea he's even got bright lights. The chief, he was an island guy. And so one of the truck drivers, we see him flash his lights, and me and Grillo look at each other like, no, this guy don't have a clue. Chief don't know what the hell that is. And Chief's just sitting there having a good time. Pretty soon, his trucker gets out. He's got blue jeans and a white T-shirt. And he comes walking over to my Via's car and starts yelling at him about, put your lights out, you dumbass, you're blind. And the chief is getting insulted. He starts to open his door, and the trucker shut the door on him. And then the door exploded open. And the chief popped out like the gorilla he was, grabbed the trucker like in a bear hug, fell over, and they're laying on the on the ground, parking lot, and the trucker is screaming like Billy Robinson done, oh God, get him off, oh my God, because my Via's on top of him, and he's eating him through his white T-shirt. I mean, he would just eat you. It was like, oh my God. And me and Tony looked at each other and said, should we go do something? And we went, no, let's get in our car. We got in our car and drove back to New Haven, but that was just two of the wildest fight kind of things I've seen, which really wasn't a fight. He just eat you on the spot.
It's a good way to end a fight, I think.
Yeah, just eat the guy.
We're not far off the top of the hour. May I ask you a couple more questions to take us up there?
Sure.
And yeah, all right, we're going to go back to the AWA then.
What time is it? Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, which one are we going to ask you then? Okay, so quite a few people asked this. Anthony Stanek said, thoughts on Scott Hall in the AWA. So I believe Scott Hall in an interview said that you were the only veteran in the AWA who would give him the time of day and actually try and help him. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, maybe, because Scott was like he had a natural charisma. It's too bad because he was a very smart guy when he was sober and straight. He was a nice guy, very clever. And you can see how he got his characters over with actually making the bad guy kind of cool, the Razor Ramon and then this and that. But he was like, I think I was one of the first guys he worked with. They brought him into the AWA when he just started. And Vern or someone came up to me and said, oh, yeah, you're going to have a match with this new kid, Scott Hall. So take it easy with him. I went, okay, a new kid. And then I go out of the dressing room and I look down the hall and the guy says, oh, yeah, that's the guy, Scott Hall. And I look and I go, oh, my God, what is he, 6'7", 300 pounds? I'm thinking to myself, a new guy that's huge. Oh, my God. But it was an interesting story because it was the first match I had with him, and I smartened him up to some things. And during the match, when he did what I told him and then stood up like he won, the crowd went nuts. And Scott felt it. And he had a respect for me from that through the years. And he'd mention it once in a while, the time we wrestled in Winnipeg. He never forgot that, what I taught him. So I kind of helped him out. And then I realized this guy can be money. He was a big guy with a good look, and he could talk and do characters. And it's too bad he had a demon, but that was Scott.
Why did it take him so long for him to sort of get his natural charisma to come on screen? Because he was like just big Scott Hall, and he just had all these characters that didn't seem to fit him at all. Why did it take so long for him to get comfortable on screen?
Well, I really don't know. Really, to be honest with you, because I was someplace and he was in the WWE, and I didn't talk to him in those days. He was doing his own thing, and then, back in those days. But yeah, you had a lot of big guys. The Hulk and Kevin Nash and just Scott, and so he had to compete with a group of guys that were big guys who could get over, but so it might have taken a while, but he caught on and he developed it, and he did a great job with creating characters.
Brendan M. also asks, I remember seeing videos of you and Scott Hall just watching wrestling. How close did you guys become?
Well, we were good friends, and then even so when he lived in Orlando here, he'd come over to the house and he wanted to do some show when the computer stuff started. It was called Last Call with Scott Hall. And we'd film it here in the TV room with me and Scott, a couple other guys, and talk about stuff. And I know nothing about computers, but I guess that's when YouTube and stuff was starting and all that. So he'd come over to the house, and he lived right down the road, not far, but I'm brain dead trying to think of all this stuff. What was your question now?
Just how close friends were you with Scott over the years?
Well, we were close friends. I mean, we didn't hang out all the time. And like I said, I never drank or went to bars. Scott did that way too much. He'd be thrown out of the restaurant here and there, but so we hung out once in a while, but not too much, because Scott was a little out there and I was never into booze and drugs.
Different interests.
Yeah. How's golfing?
Yes, you should have got him into golfing. Did you ever try?
No.
Ian M. Strong says, there was a famous story where Verne tried to shoot on Hulk Hogan. Was Larry there?
No, Larry wasn't there. I never heard that story. I mean, it was interesting because when I was doing the Bruno thing and had all the heat and stuff, Hulk just kind of started and was in the WWF. And he came up to me one time in Madison Square Garden and asked me for some advice, because he was getting tired of, he was there for like 6 months, but every night he worked with Andre because they needed a big guy to work with Andre, because Andre was so big and Terry was big. But Terry got tired of getting beat up every night for 6 months. And I gave him some advice. I said, you're getting publicity from, the New York territory with the magazines. You're a big guy. You got balance. I mean, you should do good in the business. I said, but my advice would be maybe call a different territory, go somewhere else, because I heard about you through the New York publicity thing. So Hulk said, okay. And the next thing I know is, I don't know if it was because of me or not, but he wound up in the AWA. And that was kind of a weird thing they did, because when guys were that big, they were like automatic heels, because the baby face would get the human sympathy. But it was the AWA that turned Hulk into a baby face. That's where he became a baby face, was the AWA. And then when the Wrestle Wars started, he went back and, Vince, snatched him back to the WWE.
Did you ever wrestle him or tag with him, Hogan?
No, I never did. I wish I would have, but it just never worked out that way.
I'm surprised. I would have thought maybe you would have tagged with him in Japan at some point. Never?
No, never did. I mean, I've been to Japan a few times, but never a whole lot. I remember there was I had a hell of a match with Saito at the Tokyo Dome. We sold out the Tokyo Dome like over 60,000 people. And that was the day before the Mike Tyson Buster Douglas fight in the Tokyo Dome.
Did you stick around for the fight?
Yeah, the promoter asked, anybody want to go to the fight? We'll get you in and take you to the airport to fly back. So we went to the fight, and it was, the funny part, and we were like ringside, like maybe 4 or 5 rows on the floor right by the ring. We were sitting behind Don King with his hairdo. I think Donald Trump was there, sitting by Don King, watching the big fight. And afterwards, they took us to the airport. The funny part, Sugar Ray Leonard, was he a smaller fighter?
Was, yeah.
Well, I think he was there. the funny part was, though, but we wrestled the night before, me and Saito. Then we were like up most of the night. Then we were taken to the fight. Then we watched the fight. Then we went back to the airport. By the time I got on the plane, I was so tired. Now we got a 13-hour flight back to California. I was so tired. I mean, I couldn't go to sleep or get comfortable. And Bam Bam Bigelow's wife was taking some kind of a pill. And I said, what kind of a pill are you taking? Is that like a sleeping pill? And she said, yeah, this will help you sleep. I think it was a Valium, because I never took pills or anything. I didn't know much about them. But so I got a Valium from Bam Bam Bigelow's wife and took a Valium and basically passed out and slept for 13 hours on the way back to California. We're in first class. Well, sitting across the aisle from me was some couple of boxing fans, and the one guy, Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yeah.
He was sitting in first class right next to me on the other side of the aisle. And when we woke up, Sugar Ray's staring at me with this look. And he goes, God, I wanted to kill you during this flight. I said, what happened? He goes, you snored for 13 hours. I went, I'm sorry. I was so exhausted. I took a pill and just slept. Sugar Ray wanted to kill me.
I had the exact opposite thing. I took a Valium for a long flight thinking this will knock me out. And all I did was had a freak out in Dubai airport for the connection. And it's the biggest airport in the world. And, it's a city within a city. And it's, man, that's not where you want to freak out.
No, yeah.
Just going back on Hogan, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, because you've spent time with him in the younger years and the WCW years, and you live quite close to him.
I never really spent time with him, but I knew him. In WCW, I did my 1 hour of broadcasting before Bobby. As soon as I was done, I got in the car and left. I didn't want to get caught in the crowd. I go to the casino or the hotel. But I never hung around in the dressing rooms when I did all the broadcasting.
Well, I'll tell you what. There's another question, and I can't find it in the script, that I really wanted to ask you before we shut this down. You called so many of Bill Goldberg's famous matches. Some of them went 30 seconds, some of them went 5 minutes. There was a very weird one with William Regal in the early days that I can't remember if you were calling or not, but it was quite amusing. Bill Goldberg keeps making the news at the moment. He keeps making statements about the streak and why he won't go to AEW, or why he doesn't want to go to WWE, or why he isn't a Vince McMahon fan, etc.
You mean like now, today?
Oh, yes, he's
okay.
He's still.
I didn't hear nothing.
Well, the big question is, you were there, you were living it every single week in the Monday Night Wars. What would you have done if you were the booker, if you were the person manipulating it all, about the streak? Would you have kept it going forever? When would the right time have been?
Yeah, that was a weird time because the New World Order was over so big and hot, but then they started to dilute it. And the bad thing was Turner sold out to AOL Time Warner. And AOL Time Warner was going to cancel wrestling. They didn't want wrestling on TBS. So the company they had contracts, for pay-per-views in different buildings for a year. So they had to keep going, even though they knew a year down the road, the show was going to get canceled. And a year before it was canceled, my deal wasn't renewed. Bobby Heenan's deal wasn't renewed. Eric Bischoff's deal wasn't renewed. They brought in this idiot writer, Vince Russo, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so they got this idiot writer, and as the New World Order kind of got diluted with the red and the black and the white and the black, and now they got the Latino World Order, but it was getting diluted, The writer didn't have a clue what he's doing. And I wasn't with him the last year, me, Bobby, Eric, and the guy. But I really couldn't watch any of it, because what happened was they had the new guy. Goldberg was the next big thing. I mean, the way they pushed him for a year undefeated. Can he win his 100th match? Oh my God. And he didn't, and he looked the part. I mean, so he was over. And what did I see? I see on TV Goldberg, who was the heavyweight champion of the world, gets beat by the writer. The writer is the heavyweight champion of the world. I turned off the television and didn't watch wrestling for like 10 years. I was so disgusted because even though the New World Order was huge and great and had its couple of years, it was starting to get diluted. But they had the new guy coming, the new Hulk, the new Bruno. Goldberg was the guy, and they buried him with this idiot writer. And then, and they kind of kept it a secret. The show was getting canceled, but I knew, and then the word started getting out. But it just, the AOL, CNN didn't want wrestling anymore on their TV shows. They just wanted to do the fake news.
Now, I tease you saying that was the last question. I have to ask just one more briefly before I shut this down. Quite a few people wrote in, and you can plead the fifth, but quite a few people asked, because Kevin Nash made a statement a couple of years ago saying that before your Hall of Fame speech, WWE Hall of Fame speech, you may have had one or two joints beforehand. Is that
joints?
True?
Yeah. No, I'm not. No, I never walked around the building with everybody around you in the dressing room and said you're smoking a joint. No. I couldn't. I mean, over the years, I never got in. I never drank. I mean, and I was no angel, but things were around the 80s. Cocaine was everywhere. And I tried a little bit of it, but I didn't like it because if you did one little hit, nothing really happened. You might feel a little awake. But then if you did a couple more, I didn't like the feeling because you got wired, like you'd shake and you couldn't sleep. You were awake. And for a little bottle or something, it was like $100. I got kidding. What are you, nuts? So I never got into it. And the same with the joints. I mean, I was a private pilot. I was high on life and getting in the plane. I didn't want to be all messed up. But I tried, smoking some joints now and then because the guys would always have it and they'd want to hit it. But when I sucked it in, I coughed so much from sucking it into my lungs, I got a headache. I said, how can you guys smoke this stuff? I just coughed my ass off. So I tried this and that, but hardly any, and I never wound up doing any. But the Hall of Fame, Kevin was wrong on the walking around the building smoking a joint.
Well, maybe not walking around the building, but I think the accusation was you were stoned during the speech.
No, I wasn't stoned. I was so emotional because it was the end of a dream come true, and it's more of a story to it. I'm the one that kind of talked Bruno into going into the Hall of Fame because Vince wanted him for years, but he wouldn't do it. Anyway, that's another story. But I got Bruno to do it. And it was such an honor when I walked out there and got the reaction and saw the crowds. I was saying a couple of things. And then I got overwhelmed by too many things to say at one time. And I don't know, I kind of blanked out for a couple minutes. Well, I didn't know what to say. And then I scared myself. I remember in my head saying, say something stupid. So then I started talking again. But it was an emotional kind of thing to say because it was such a serious thing to me because that was my dream, to be like my hero Bruno and this and that. And then he inducted me into the Hall of Fame. It was like the end of a kid's dream that came true. And it was very emotional to me. So I know I kind of shut up for a couple of minutes. I didn't know why. I was overwhelmed with thoughts of things to say and remember yelling at myself. And Arnold Schwarzenegger was there. I came back and he was like my biggest fan. He says, God, you're the greatest actor I ever saw with that dramatic pause. Because they were all into it. And I go, dramatic pause? Arnold, I blanked out. I had emotion. And he went, oh, no. But, yeah, it had nothing to do with pot. No.
There you go. A rumor killer. Have you still got the ring? You must have the ring.
Oh yeah, I got the ring.
Is it displayed somewhere? Do you wear it out or?
Well, I got it, upstairs in the spot. But when I go do autograph signings or conventions, or they picked me up in a limo, took me to the Royal Rumble. Whenever it's a wrestling thing, I put the ring on with great pride. It's one thing that I'm most proud of, the Hall of Fame ring.
I'm glad to hear it as well. Right, on that note, thank you very much for spending so much time with me.
There was something else you asked me. I don't know if I answered the question before. I'm curious about Goldberg. He said he wasn't going to do any more wrestling or no WWE or no AEW or no. Did he say why?
He said AEW is too cheesy. He said
it is.
Okay.
It needs help. It needs help.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair to say. WWE, he had fallout with Vince because Vince offered him a retirement match and then he went back on the word or something. And then he was complaining about some other wrestler having a streak, and I don't know. He's complaining a lot at the moment.
Well, he's getting up there too. So hey, if there comes to a point where it's time for the next generation,
golf. Goldberg, he needs to get into golf. Chill out a bit.
Golfberg, yeah.
Bill Golfberg. There you go.
Boo on me.
Where do you get the T-shirt? If you want a Boo on me T-shirt, where do you go, Larry?
Well, you know what? The guy at Pro Wrestling Tees heard about, knew about the Boo on Me song, heard about it, the movie coming out. Let me plug this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And knew the Boo on Me was going to be in there. So he made up a shirt and sent me one. But they're available at Pro Wrestling Tees. Boo on Me. Great for protesting. So, but the movie's called The Unbreakable Bunch. You can Google it. The trailers are up. They had a premiere in Detroit in a few theaters last weekend, I think. And they're trying to get it out like any time. It's a movie not about wrestling. It's not a wrestling movie. Action-packed science fiction thriller. Wrestlers save a town from aliens. But it was very well done, family friendly, and I can't wait to see the whole thing. The trailers are up. But The Unbreakable Bunch. And if you don't like it, boo on me.
I'm going to tell you who's it starring. Ray Lloyd, Glacier.
Yeah, Glacier wrote it. It took him 10 years to get it made.
Oh, he wrote it as well. I didn't realize.
Yeah, him and Luther Biggs. Yeah, Ray's movie. And Ernie the Cat Miller was in it. Tongue was in it. Me. Some real actors. Some cameos by Stan Hansen.
Haku, of course.
Yeah, and a couple of women actresses. It was very well done. Very well done. I can't wait to see it.
There you go. I'll tell you what, for the interview, I'll shove the link on as well so people can find the film. I'll shove PWTs on as well for the T-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll try and get some of those sold as well and some publicity for the film as well. But you were going to do the T-shirt again then. I saw you twitching the shirt. Yeah. But for now, listen, thank you so much for watching. Larry, we're going to have to do a part 3. We didn't even get through a third of these questions. So at some point in the future, you'll have to come back on.
Hey, anytime you want me, James, let me know. And to everybody, welcome to Larry Land, and I hope all your dreams come true, too.